Guy McPherson here with Neil again, and we are going to enter part two of what is going to be at least a three-part series. We would like to dedicate this particular conversation and PowerPoint file to Eugene Odum. Eugene Odum was 74 years old when I met him at the Institute of Ecology at the University of Georgia campus. And he came up with the idea of an ecosystem as an organizing concept for ecology. He was an amazing individual. He was 74 years old and still working when I was at the Institute of Ecology, working on my postdoctoral research. And he asked me if I had time to talk with him. Unbelievable. He's still working at the age of 74. I'm just some young person who doesn't know anything. And he asked if I have time for him to talk with me. And we talked for about an hour. And apparently he did that with all of the graduate students and all the postdocs that came through and spent time at the Institute of Ecology. So an amazing individual. He and his brother, Howard T. Odum, who worked as a faculty member, as a professor in Florida, interestingly died the same year. And Howard was either 7 or 9 years younger than Eugene. In any event, Eugene Odum was an amazing individual who I will not forget for a very long time. With that, Neil, can you start us off with Rocks for Jocks Part 2, The Carbon Pulse or Living on Ancient Sunlight?
Guy, thanks. And I think it's great that you're dedicating episodes to people, scientists in related fields, to conservation biology and climate study, because I think we need to acknowledge the vast number of brilliant minds and gifted teachers who have contributed to this profession broadly and with their heart and soul, as you have. So I think it's a great idea. So this episode, we're continuing. In the previous episode, we tried to focus on where do fossil fuels come from? What does it mean? What periods do they come from? And I like to start, maybe we'll start for a while with this great slide from Robert Crumb, this next slide, just to remind people. Most of coal is said to come from the Carboniferous, so that's where most fossil fuels come from. And, we have humans at the top of the heap there. And the point is that we're looking backwards. We have been looking backwards at where do fossil fuels come from, what epochs they were created. And let's go to the next slide just for a quick review. So petroleum and natural gas formed mainly from ancient waterways, seas, oceans, where marine animals, mostly very small critters, lived and died. Forms of diatoms and so forth, would proliferate and then live their lifespan and then float down to the bottom of the body of water, where they would sit there and decompose and get compressed over millennia to form what natural life forms do. They form eventually in pockets of oil and natural gas. And then the next slide, if we can go to that. Coal, a similar process said to occur mostly in swamplands, wetlands, or in areas where lots of trees and forests and jungles existed. The trees did not decompose at 30 to 100 million years ago, 300 million years ago, because there were not the kinds of bacteria and microorganisms that could digest lignins and other things that are in other complex proteins and cellulose that are in trees. I found that very interesting to learn about. That
And
yes,
we need to point out how important this is. We constantly claim that we are superior to other organisms, in part because we're so large and our brains are so big and we can do these amazing things. We depend completely, with respect to the set of living arrangements, on tiny organisms, which you just pointed out. It's the small things that really matter with respect to how we live.
indeed. And the behavior, the capabilities and function of those small things that determine their role in the ecosystem. And it is all interrelated and interconnected. The more we find out about the biome of the human body, there's multiple biomes. Apparently, your gut has different parts of your gut. Your nose has its own biome, your armpits, etc. And so we've learned that we live and necessarily live with lots of microorganisms. Some of them play a beneficial role, some of them might play a toxic role if they get out of balance. But it has always been thus. And so I thought in this episode, we're going to go to, we've seen, where does coal and oil come from? Let's look at what we've been doing with them and how we have built a modern industrial society, absolutely depending on and linked with, in every sense, as almost like a weird a life form that is depending on the dead remains of life forms of not just a year ago or 10 years ago, but the life forms of 300 million years ago. And I want to emphasize, if we go back to the slide, no, we're on the coal slide, on either of those slides, that the title of this is Living on Ancient Sunlight. And we should point out that, is it fair to say, Guy, that all or almost all of the energy that created all life on Earth and that then was then buried and turned into these fossil fuels began as solar energy, as sunlight?
Oh, yes, absolutely. In fact, I think it was Richard Heinberg who wrote a book that had a title or a subtitle called The Last Rays of Ancient Sunlight. And and he was talking about peak fossil fuels having passed peak at that point, and therefore we are living on the last rays of ancient sunlight, the last rays of ancient sunlight that created these fossil fuels that we have come to depend upon so heavily.
I used to know this stuff by heart because I was in the field, but the sun, solar radiation at high noon hits the Earth, a square meter of Earth with what? I think it's 300 watts of power per square meter.
Yeah, I used to know these things as well, but now I have a severe case of CRS.
Yeah, but you can look it up, how many watts per square meter of sunlight, and that is the primary productivity of the Earth. The growth of all life on Earth is directly or indirectly a result of solar energy warming the planet. And there is a small amount of heat that is generated deep that comes up from the interior of the planet. But I think it accounts for 4 or 5% of the heat energy that is used by life forms that live, say, even at the lowest depths of the ocean, on the ocean floor. There's life forms that do depend on hot vents and that adapted hot sea vents of steam and lava and superheated water. But I think overall, it's the solar energy directly from the sun is 96% of all life on Earth derives its energy and its activity, photosynthesis or other activities, from its other power, its ability to exist from solar energy.
So if you're having a bad day and the sun's not out, that's why, because the sun's not out. We need that. We need that sun to basically to power all life on the planet.
And I always, as I've begun doing, I frequently have to play the role of the asshole department. And so those in the asshole department, and I've actually heard people say this, the asshole department might chime in, well, if you're telling me this is a revelation, if you're saying that fossil fuels are all solar energy, then I'm using 100% solar energy as I drive my Ford 350 Super Duty with diesel, and I'm driving my ATV with gasoline because I can't have fun in nature unless I bring an internal combustion engine with me. And let's see, I got my electric power, which is all from coal here in coal country. And let's see what else. I even have an old gas refrigerator. I have one of them fridges that runs on natural gas. So I'm 100% solar energy. Yep.
Yes, you are.
Am I right that at a factual level, you can't really fault that logic? But that's not what we're talking about when we're talking about going solar today. We're not talking about using the solar energy from microorganisms and trees and plants that were smashed down 300 million years ago and took 30 million years to cook down into something like a fuel, a super concentrated, high energy density fuel. I don't think that's what we mean by going solar, is it?
No, and that's the key point, the one you made there at the end. It took millions of years for this set of fossil fuels to be created, and we're using it up in the span of a couple of human lifetimes.
Let's go to the next slide and look at where we're going to start. We're going to go deep here on coal. I don't know if we'll have time to go deep on oil. I think we won't. We'll say that. And by deep, I mean we're still scratching the surface. So these are two maps. There is major coal regions in the US and major coal regions worldwide. Highly schematic. This is just where the greatest concentrations are found. There's coal pockets in many, many locations, but this is the mineable, usable coal historically. And it's hard to see, but England, in fact, has a shit ton of coal. And if you look at the world map, you'll see that southern England is filled with coal. In fact, there's coal pretty much in many, many locations, but this is the big historical pockets. Let's go to the next slide. We're going to move along as quickly as we can here.
And there's a phrase that started in England, coals to Newcastle, I think it is.
Indeed, coals to Newcastle.
Yeah, and I was in Newcastle and I asked somebody what that meant. And they said back in the day, Newcastle was the source of an enormous amount of coal. So coals to Newcastle meant nothing. If you had coals that you were taking to Newcastle, so what?
Right. It's pointless. It's an English expression for something pointless. Like that's bringing coals to Newcastle, or that's bringing sand to the Middle East or something.
Right.
So, the coal, the Britain, why is Britain, we know that the Romans had to figure out how to use coal in England because they're from Italy and southern Italy. I mean, they're freezing their patooties off there in England, trying to maintain the Roman Empire in what is today England. And it is they, we understand, who began trying to use coal for heat there. At least that's one of the groups that was. I'm sure that ancient Britons were also using coal. Coal was found on the surface in those days. It was viewed as a semi-magical rock that would burn, and it was quickly found that it produced because of its energy density, it produced superior fire compared to just wood or charcoal for high heat tasks such as iron work, bronze, the Iron Age, the Bronze Age, and so forth. It is not exclusively the fuel that was used to smelt early metals, but it was a very high intensity. It produces a higher heat, it's my understanding. And so you can forge and melt iron and other metals using coal.
Yes, I suspect we wouldn't have had the Iron Age without coal.
Without coal. And again, so coal use has been used for a long time. So in this next slide that we're looking at, you can see two actually quite similar. One is from ancient China, showing a pit. It's called a bell pit because it's roughly shaped like a bell. And in both ancient China and then the one on the right is from I think representing early English mining. You literally dug a hole and sent people down there. They had to be hoisted by primitive ropes and winches, or windlasses as they're called in Britain, and you were winching up buckets of coal, winching down children mostly. There's no way to. Children and women were actually the preferred because they're smaller. They could go down in small holes and dig for coal. Let's go to the next slide.
I just want, I just want to point out that there's somebody there on the far right in that pit that is taking a break, right? Somebody's just sitting there.
I don't know. I don't think that if their foreman was watching them, they would be whipped, I'm sure.
Right, right.
You know, the amount of by hand work that we have come through, almost nobody today does anything by hand. If people today in modern industrial societies are asked to do something by hand, you hear a loud sort of a long set of whining occurs because that kind of labor, why would I do that? You know, there's so many devices to help me do that.
Mm-hmm.
But the level of backbreaking labor that was entailed, even here where you do have the use of the wheel and ropes and winches that are exercising a great deal of leverage for the power of a human. Horses, you'll notice in the right-hand image, a horse is drawing the rope. So animals were harnessed, and usually in a circular run, they would just walk in a circle, tethered to a winch that would wind up a cable or a rope to hoist up or hoist down or lower humans or the commodity, whatever it was. This kind of mining wasn't just done for coal. It was done for all of the ores that we began using when we began making things out of metal. The amount of backbreaking labor that it has taken to get us to this point. But let's keep going. Let's go to the next one. So this just gives you a little more history that in the upper illustration on the left, I think we need to go back one. Yes. The upper illustration on the left, a hurrier, also called a coal drawer or a coal thruster, was a child or woman employed by a collier. This is where we get the name Collier. If you know someone whose last name is Collier, or there was a department store named Collier's, that means a coal factory owner, a coal maker, employed by a collier to pull and push shallow coal carts up slanted shafts of early English coal mines, using only their bodies. So the shafts of these early coal mines were really no higher than you could crawl up, and the coal cart was pushed and pulled by hand by children or women who had small bodies up. The amount of back-breaking work and dangerous work, these shafts would cave in. They would be filled with methane, which is obviously natural gas, at any kind of high concentration. It is something that will suffocate you, and it will also become explosive. I mean, what a horrendous form of work. It's not like running around hunting a wildebeest with a spear. This is completely horrendous, thankless slave work. Guy, do you have any ways to put a positive color on this?
Well, I can only imagine that the reason they stopped using women and children for this was because they were running out of women and children, or maybe when the men came home at night, there was nothing to eat. So get the women back in the kitchen. I mean, this is insane. It says right in the description, a child or woman.
Yes.
To push and pull the coal up. That's
Indeed.
amazing. They
Yes.
didn't even try to hide it.
the shafts increased in size. Oh, and another critical thing is and danger was watering. When there is lots of water underground in most places, and there is surface water that will quickly pour down any hole you create. And so a major task of coal mining from the beginning was dewatering. The first thing that they had to pull up in buckets was often a bunch of water, and they had to find a place to put it so it wouldn't seep back down. They mostly threw it into the nearest river or made a channel to the nearest river, creating wastewater that has a mixture of stuff in it that would normally not be appearing in that concentration in a river. But watering. So if the mine shaft tends to fill with water, you can drown in it. You can be drowned, you can be exploded, you can be suffocated, you can be crushed. Let's just say this was one of the most dangerous occupations in its day, and a major cause of impetus for the safety rules that we have now, from the 8-hour workday, from the laws against child labor. Laws against child labor weren't imposed because some general store owner was using his 12-year-old daughter or 12-year-old son to stack products on a shelf. No, the child labor laws were originally imposed because children were dying in these kinds of conditions of mines. So, dewatering. And so if you look on the right, I mean, we see a more modern mine, but you just look at the different tasks there. You have either slanted shafts, inclined shafts. You've got a ton of materials to remove. You've got elevators that need to be powered, whether by horses, winding a cable, or humans. You've got lots of things that need an immense amount of power. And guess what? To the rescue, if we go to the next slide, all of these tasks, lifting the coal itself, powering the drills, powering the fans and ventilation, the first coal mines that had continuous ventilation and continuous dewatering, depended on an invention that was created specifically for one purpose: the steam engine. It's an example of technology. Some of our greatest technologies, if you look at their history, they were invented for an extremely narrow task. And this is true with the steam engine. The first steam engine was, I say modern because there's some evidence of the use of steam in very early societies, but they didn't have pressurized vessels. But the first modern steam engine was the Newcomen steam engine, designed specifically for one thing only: to solve the problem of how do you pump water out of flooded coal mines and other kinds of mines. So literally, coal was already being used on a scale. Follow me on this, because I mean, this is history they don't teach any longer. They don't teach any history, really. Coal was already being used on a scale to involve enough of a mining activity that the level of the issue of the mines filling with water and the need to dewater the mines was such a task that it created the human creativity of people like Thomas Newcomen, in 1712, invents a pump to pump the water out of a coal mine, and it is powered by coal and steam. So you have a feedback loop here that we devised and had to build to keep getting the coal. It's something that, I don't know, it strikes me as so interesting that the steam engine was built just for this one purpose. What do you make of that, Doc?
Well, not only is that amazing, I mean, inventions throughout history have been nothing short of startling. Of course, in retrospect, we think, oh, well, no big deal, because we have something far more advanced. The second thing that comes to mind is, you notice this is all Caucasian men shown here. That's because the women and children were doing the heavy lifting, right?
Indeed.
They're the ones getting the coal out of the ground. So these characters got nothing to do but sit around and invent all day. Ah, it's good. It's good to be a Caucasian man, I must say.
Caucasian men specialize in making slaves of the following people: children, women, men of any other color or ethnicity. If you just look at history, that's what Caucasian men have done. I would say you'd also have to admit that Muslim men have specialized in making slaves of other Muslims and of people of color. But there's enough guilt over slavery to go around. And even, I think, even Black African kings made slaves of others. Humans turning other humans into their slaves, that's been going on for a long time, whether as open slavery or as wage slavery. Because indeed, in England, slavery had been eliminated. So technically, these women and children weren't slaves, they were being paid. But I think we all know what a wage slave is.
Right. We still have them today, by the way.
And so very quickly, what I find so fascinating is the steam engine was invented only for this narrow purpose. But of course, it very quickly became a source of rotary power. Now, rotary power is extremely useful, but there were forms of rotary power before the steam engine, but they depended on two things. Either you were next to a river and you used a water wheel to turn a axle, and you could then harness all sorts of things to that. And the first mills, you have towns in this country, in the US and Canada, and towns in England that who include the name mill, water mill, or Sutter's mill, or whatever. And that's because towns were located along waterways, because waterways were the source of energy and transport before any of these modern forms. And water-powered looms, water-powered grindstones, water-powered tools of every kind. Indeed, furniture making could be primitive mills, where, I mean, by primitive, I mean the earliest mills that provided rotary power could actually power lathes and wood turning tools. And so, you know, even before we had the steam engine, we had rotary power and windmills. Of course, windmills were used in Europe and elsewhere to power a rotating stone that ground hard grains into flours, into usable baking flour. And so we've been harnessing water and wind, renewable energies, before we hit on non-renewable fossil fuels. We were basically industrializing as much as you could with solar, with wind, and with water. What are your thoughts on that? Hydropower.
We are amazingly clever, and our ability to look at almost anything in nature and then mimic it in a way that provides some sort of power, some sort of leisure for us is amazing. And this is just one of hundreds of examples that we could come up with.
And so with the steam engine came something where, literally, follow me on this. I mean, it's just, you can't make this up. The steam engine initially allows mining to accelerate, reliably pumping now huge volumes of water out of flooded mines, enabling mines to go deeper than they would ever have been able to go if there was not the steam engine to pump the water out. But wait, there's more. The steam engine is quickly harnessed to raise and lower the elevators and the systems of trams, whether slanted or going vertical or on a slant. The steam engine could then, you have a rotary tool that is powered by steam, a steam engine. You can wind rope, harness it to a windlass or winch. You can harness it to anything that can be made into a rotary machine. And so we quickly see in the following the steam engine, rotary mills and looms for the weaving process, which create the first factories, again, where children and women are used for most of the laborious tasks of threading things and monitoring these machines and getting their hands stuck in them and their fingers severed on a regular basis by this machinery. The cotton gin, which, believe me, it was not powered by hand. It was quickly powered by steam in a rotary mill to remove the seeds from cotton, which formerly had to be done by hand. This greatly sped up the creation of cotton textiles. And then we get the steam engine, which you look at it and it's really just, you take the steam engine in the upper left, which is Newcomen's design. It's a pressure vessel, a cylindrical pressure vessel with a heat source behind it. If you look at the steam engine in the lower right here, and it's literally, it's just a pressure vessel now mounted on top of some wheels with a firebox behind it. It's just wonderfully obvious in hindsight what you could do with the steam engine. Do you have any further thoughts on just to where we are with this history?
Well, it's only a couple of simple, short steps from what we're seeing here in the early 1800s, going back to the early 1700s, between these devices and the ability to have a subway in New York City, which transports millions of people every day. Without the ability to pump the water out of the subway system, it would be flooded in a couple of days.
Indeed.
So this is incredible. And the
ability to put fresh air down there.
Yes, exactly. The things we depend upon today were a product of things that were happening, inventions that were made a few hundred years ago.
The ability to build the Brooklyn Bridge. I mean, people don't realize that the bridges and tunnels of New York, for example, were built by incredibly industrious, high-risk workers called sandhogs, and they had to be lowered into underwater caissons, a pressurized vessel, where they were lowered into these underwater caissons that had to be pressurized. Air had to be pumped down into them. And if the pressure was wrong, either too great or too low, they could get the bends. They were not wearing diving suits. They were put in underground compartments called caissons to dig the foundations of such things. And all of this required steam engines to dewater them, to pressurize them, to raise and lower, to power the tools. We quickly learned to compress air with a steam engine and power an air hammer. All of these incredible tools to chip away at whatever we needed to chip away at, to modify the landscape, to go after other, it all then became a feedback loop where then we have the tools to go deeper, faster, longer, better, after other metals, other ores, and build a civilization based on materials that we have drawn out of Mother Earth. So let's go to the next slide, because I'm trying to dramatize just how much coal, and it's really important that we understand coal. In the age of industry is the age of coal, and oil came a bit later. Everything that we associate with modern devices, shipping, railroads, rotary factory, anything in a factory pretty much could be powered by steam. If we had to go back to coal, if we had to get rid of oil and gas, we could pretty much do that. We could have a coal and electric civilization. And indeed, that's what the shape of civilization, of industrial civilization, was till about 1910, when the oil age comes in. But let's go. I just want to take a look at steamshipping. The first steamship in the US was the Enterprise. What a great name. It's in the upper left. And then steam transportation along major rivers, mainly the Mississippi, But steam shipping, ocean-going steamships, of course, didn't look like this because they had to cope with high seas. But shown here are typical Mississippi River ships. They would pull up to the shallows, and there would be a way to get on a gangplank, and they would pull away. And people and goods, materials and horses, every kind of thing were transported up and down the Mississippi. Our waterways were our highways at this time, before roads and highways, before the oil age and the automobile age. And towns would spring up in areas along the rivers where they could be joined by railroads. So we had a rail and shipping system mainly until the oil age. Guy, any further thoughts here?
Well, it makes me wonder that the name of the first ship you said was the Enterprise. I wonder if that's where Gene Roddenberry got the idea to call the Starship
I have no doubt. I mean, it's a natural thing. The enterprise means undertaking, entreprise, to hold between, I think, is literally what it does. Someone could do a deeper dive on the etymology of enterprise.
And
but let's go to the,
Gene Roddenberry was an incredible human being. He was knowledgeable about so many different things, and so I'm not surprised at all that it was the Starship Enterprise.
You know, for people, Guy, it's shameful that we are now at the age where we might have to clarify for the younger audience who Gene Roddenberry was. We're talking about the series Star Trek, which, you know, began in the 60s or 70s and which has had multiple sequels and so forth. But it is the vision of a storyteller and producer named Gene Roddenberry, a futurist.
Right.
But let's go here to the next slide. And again, we could go into you have a steam engine, you have a source of rotary power. So the next thing that a coal-fired steam engine gets hooked up to is, of course, an electric generator. When the founders of modern electric technology, Nikola Tesla and Thomas Edison, discovered the basic principles of electric generation, it involved a turbine, a winding of wire around a turbine in which the magnetic field would be moved in such a way as to generate power, and that power then conducted through transmission lines, whether it's alternating current or direct current. The need to turn a turbine to create this magnetic field and create this electrical energy required obviously a rotary device, and that rotary device was a steam engine, and it was powered by coal. And so here you have the basic architecture of a steam turbine. Missing from the graphic on the left is it's funny that it's missing. They have a condensing water cooling. So this is where you cool water in the river. It's hard to tell, and you can do a combination of cooling it in the river and cooling steam in the air. You look in the upper right, this is a massive coal-fired electric generating facility in Poland. And people think when they see these conical-shaped towers, the wide ones, that it must be a nuclear facility, but no. The conical-shaped towers that you see on the left there are steam recondensing towers that take the water that has been boiled and condensed into steam and turned into steam, is then exhausted and put in those towers so that much of it can recondense into usable water for the process. The fire, the heat from the coal fire, is in the red stacks there that are red striped. And so you can pretty much tell in a power plant, when you see the red striped chimneys, you're looking at where the effluent from the burning of the coal is happening. When you see these wide kind of mushroom shaped towers, that's just generally steam that's being recondensed, and that smoke is not harmful from those stacks, it's just water vapor. But a lot of people don't know when they look at a power plant what they're looking at. Any
I-
comments?
I'm glad you brought up nuclear power because these are not nuclear power plants that we're seeing here. But
Well,
essentially, nuclear power is just a process of heating water.
exactly. So if you can generate modern electricity on a continuous power curve, if you can rotate a turbine, how you rotate that turbine, the following are all technologies for rotating the turbine. Coal, burning coal in a steam engine, burning gas in essence in a steam engine, a boiler, using nuclear fission to power to heat the water. If you need to create steam, you need to create compressed steam to turn the turbine. And so you can also turn a turbine with hydropower. And so hydroelectric power is literally just using a flow of water past a turbine, it's just a very high tech, very concentrated version of an old fashioned water mill that used water to turn a stone. Only in this case, you're turning a turbine. But yes, that's what electric power generation requires. We're not going to get into nuclear too much in this. We're going to stick with fossil fuels. Let's go one more slide because we got to keep on schedule here. So coal, many people don't know this, but coal is a major input into making steel and iron. Modern furnaces that do this require coal or coke. Specifically, coke is added to it. I don't know the chemical process, but someone who wants to read up on this can easily research it. And of course, we don't like coal in this country, and we don't like the pollution that coke plants produce. So guess what? Most of the materials that now make steel and most of the making of steel and forms of anything to do with iron are done in countries that let's say are slightly earlier in the development stage than the modern US and have pollution laws and are willing to accept these forms of technology now. But they used to be all over Pennsylvania, Ohio, Indiana, and Chicago had steel plants throughout, and coke plants, and incredibly polluting and dirty and filthy. This one is in the Ukraine, where Ukraine is a major producer of steel and iron, and so is Poland, so is much of Eastern Europe, and of course China. But even if you said you're never going to use another lump of coal to generate electricity, you would be needing coal to do many coal or things derived from coal to do many industrial tasks that we still depend on. Any thoughts, Guy, on this?
Yes, absolutely. I hear every day that somebody is going to reduce their carbon footprint by doing X, Y, or Z. But really, almost everything we do in this set of living arrangements depends on those fossil fuels, whether it's for delivery of goods, including groceries at the grocery store, whether it's growing that food that you find at the grocery store. It's literally thousands of things that occur that we just take for granted. The bread just shows up at the grocery store, right? I mean, when was the last time you baked a loaf of bread? For me, it's been a really long time.
Indeed. And we're going to talk about reducing what we're in the next episode, not this, we will go into what we are doing and what we say we're doing about reducing our dependence on various of these things. But coal, I mean, it is possible. There are steel and aluminum plants that use electricity from the grid. They use a massive amount of electricity to melt steel or to melt aluminum and smelt it. The reason they do that in this country is because, again, we don't like the pollution that burning coal causes. But somewhere that electricity is produced by a mix that we are going to get into of fuels. In this country, it's still only about 9% renewables. In China, coal is the major source. Coal and now nuclear are becoming major sources of electric generation. So we're going to need electricity on such a grand scale if we get rid of coal to smelt metals. But I think in this case, coke is actually an ingredient. I could be wrong, but I think it is. It's part of what is added. I could be wrong about that, but it's definitely produces a higher heat for these blast furnaces. Let's keep going because you'll find that coal or things derived from fossil fuels turn up in surprising places. In the next slide, graphite is a highly purified form of carbon, and it is derived. It has to be mined, just like coal does, and purified, and is an ingredient used in batteries. And so I don't know if there's graphite-free batteries, but if they're graphite-free, that means they're going to have something else in them, lithium or some other metal or mineral that has to be extracted from the earth. And all mining looks like coal mining. I mean, all mining looks either like strip mining or shaft mining, or God forbid, mountaintop removal. And all mining requires huge machinery and automation. And none of that machinery is electric at the moment. Some of it may become electric. Some of it's diesel electric. That is, a diesel engine inside a giant crane powers the electric motors that power the hydraulic pumps that do all the things that the crane does. But there's a fossil fuel at the base driving much of this machinery that we're going to depend on to keep mining all these minerals for the so-called zero. What is the phrase? Net zero or zero emission, Guy? Have I got it right? Is this zero emission right here? This lithium battery that I'm looking at? Zero emission, my friend. Zero.
Net zero. We're not
Net
quite
zero.
there yet. Most of us who are old enough know graphite from pencil leads, the lead pencil. And currently, I suspect one of the primary uses of graphite is as a lubricant.
There you go.
In addition
to
the
dry lubricant.
Right.
Yeah. So let's keep going. Now, we don't have time, but I mean, I could do the same history if we looked at the and we will in another episode. Just imagine the same history. We've done coal, just sort of skipping the stones over the top of the history of coal. Same for oil. So the earliest use in modern times of oil, by modern times, I mean not ancient Rome or ancient China, where of course they used oil that they found on the ground. We have evidence of that. We've known about petroleum for a good 1,000 to 2,000 years, maybe longer. But again, 96% of all petroleum that has been burned for human use has been burned in the last 100 years or 150 years. It has not been burned in the last 3,000 years. The pulse, the massive pulse of how much coal and how much oil we have mined and used. And again, it's a feedback loop. As you saw with coal, the coal-fired steam engine was the solution invented to dewater the coal mine. And it led very quickly to a score of other critical inventions based on that rotary power that allowed us to speed up, must go faster, must have more, must expand, must grow the extraction of coal, iron, steel, materials, minerals for building everything. Limestone for making concrete, Portland cement, all of it must go faster. And it's been enabled on at a level of orders of magnitude more power and more and faster than could have been done by humans. Even slaves could have achieved. And you can imagine the same thing for oil. So this is just, if I were to start, I would talk about how kerosene was derived from oil found at the surface of, near the surface or on the surface, and was used as a home to light homes as an alternative to candles. And most pioneers, most people before gas lighting, gas, natural gas was used in cities to light homes. Before that, it was kerosene or candles. But most people, when the sun went down, you went to sleep. You started to shut down around 7 or 8 o'clock. You'd have dinner. You might have it by candlelight or firelight, and then you would go to sleep. There was none of this keeping lights on all night. It was very costly. Candles took a long time to make. You would only use a candle if it was a sort of a meaningful and critical family task to do at night, milking cows or taking care of something on the farm. For the most part, it was a luxury. You see here, a family is knitting, and a gentleman is practicing. I think he's practicing the saxophone or smoking a meerschaum pipe. I can't tell which.
I was trying to figure that out myself. I don't know what he's doing.
I think that is a meerschaum pipe. It's a meerschaum pipe is this giant thing, looks like a clarinet. I don't think he's playing the clarinet. That is a meerschaum pipe. You can look up what a meerschaum pipe is.
And he's doing this while he reads the newspaper?
Yeah. This is a middle class or upper middle class luxury, circa 1880, 1870. So we're coming to sorry, Guy, you were going to say something?
Yeah, and you thought you were having a bad day?
This would be seen as luxury, that the family doesn't have to basically live in the dark at sundown and pretty much go to bed, which is what most families had to do. There would be a fire, they might stay up. But if you've ever been camping and you notice that you pretty much can't stay awake once sun goes down unless you're using horrendous artificial light Coleman lamps or these 4,000 Kelvin LCDs. Now these LEDs burn at such a artificial temperature that they can keep you awake. But if you just go camping and don't use any artificial light, you'll find your eyes are drooping at 8:30 after you eat. You're just going to go down for the count. That's how we're naturally wired to do, not stay up looking at screens or lighted. So I want to get to this because we're almost done with this episode. In reflecting on just what we've learned about our dependence on the role of coal and what we did with it in the last 150 years. And of course, nobody wants to talk about coal now, but coal is still with us and we're going to talk about it. But oil and gas are still very much with us in North America and in the modern industrial economy. And I found that Dr. M. King Hubbert, people don't know this, he predicted peak oil, that what is called conventional petroleum would peak in the late 20th century. And he was quite correct. He was off by maybe 15 or 20 years. And of course, people who make predictions that are turned out to be off by 15 or 20 years are held to have been wrong. But every summer I see predictions. I mean, this has been true ever since 2008. I think it's been true ever since 2002. Every summer there are predictions that this will be this July and August, or this August and September, the dollar is going to completely fail, and put your money into Bitcoin and gold now. And I think it happens in the summers because people don't have anything to do, and because some investors have this sell in May and go away thing. And so all the ads can reliably be found on YouTube and elsewhere saying dollar collapse imminent. And the dollar collapse imminent has been a story since, let's see, I think since 2002. Hasn't happened yet, but nobody takes to task those pundits who have been saying that every year for the last 20 years.
Right.
So
I think it was probably dates back to the early 1970s when oil peaked in the United States, as predicted by M. King Hubbert decades in advance.
indeed.
Oil peaked in the United States in, I think it was 1972. That led to a series of really intense recessions in this country. And Hubbard predicted that well in advance as well. And it's just another reminder of how dependent we are on fossil fuels, oil in that case.
Indeed. And the two are connected. I mean, the dollar collapse narrative has been going on since the 70s because we so many things that we could talk about, but we don't have time. But I'll just touch on them. The dollar supposedly used to be connected directly to the value of gold. It was actually, if you look into it, it was a bimetallic dollar. It was connected to both gold and silver, and each of those was severed over a series of steps that kind of reduced the connection. The final straw being 1971, but really, the dollar had not been fully connected to gold since the 1920s or 30s. But people like to say it was Nixon who detached from gold, but that's only partially true. And right in the jaws of just right after that, came the oil crises, and the bloom was kind of off the rose of this industrial expansion. It was in some ways the moment that we experienced an increase in the cost of oil, a significant and sudden increase. It became somehow it related to inflation. It related to a sense that things were not going to be as easy as they were. And as you pointed out, Guy, indeed, M. King Hubbert, who was a petroleum geologist and is a renowned figure in the history of petroleum geology, he knew, he was smart enough, and he did this graph, which I want to spend a little time on. This is our second to last slide here. On the left, we have energy per capita per unit of time. That is the amount of energy per person in the society. And then we have time in thousands of years. And if you put your cursor just where it says the first agrarian age began before 40,000 BC and lasted until 700 years prior to 1949. And so there's almost no increase in energy per capita until suddenly it just shoots up with what he knew was the fossil fuel and petroleum age. And it shoots up to a massive amount of energy that is available to each of us in a way that it's just no comparison to the amount of energy that was available to people back in Rome, ancient Rome, or Britain, or China. Even if you go back and find that they did use some coal and oil for various purposes, in no way was it as much as is available and being used and dependent on being used as today. And
right. So here we have, going back 10,000 years, energy
right,
per capita per person per unit of time is essentially zero. I mean, it's a really, really low number. And
really
then
no,
and then fossil fuels come along. Whoa.
indeed. And so he traced this graph and he said that, and again, he started this first agrarian age in 40,000 BC, and he said it lasted up until several hundred years prior to 1949. So he's saying, in this essence, he's saying really the history of the steam engine starts in 1714, and the heavier use of coal. The steam engine was already invented because we were using coal on a much larger scale and needing to mine it. So he's saying that pulse begins probably in 1700 or 1600, our use of coal and the creation of real cities that depend on that. And then it shoots up, and he's got some other curves here. The industrial age could last indefinitely if it is powered by solar radiation, etc. So that was part of his thinking. But it does go down. Notice it does go down. So we don't know. And then he says the second agrarian age declines to the subsistence level of our agrarian ancestors curve too. So in 1949, he publishes something with this graph, which was absolute heresy. I mean, he was then treated as having completely betrayed. He was just describing the energy facts and the known reserves that he could see and the rate at which we were using them. And he was just saying it's likely that, I mean, it's obvious that this is a carbon pulse that is of energy of ancient fossil fuels that have at some point are going to run out or become expensive. It doesn't matter which happens. If they become too expensive to usefully continue to rely on, then it will become less and less over time of what we depend on. And what will we do after that? And he is tracing here the outcomes of what comes after, what might come after the fossil fuel age. Thoughts here, Guy?
Well, this is pretty amazing. I suppose we need to point out that if we're going to decrease in either way, the second agrarian age or this industrial age lasting indefinitely, if we're going to significantly decrease industrial activity, that's going to invoke the aerosol masking effect. So probably things aren't going to be as rosy as Hubbard pointed out, particularly when he refers to the second agrarian age. So it's amazing what he was doing. This is in 1948, remember? His
Yeah,
paper in Science was published in 1949. So this is pretty amazing stuff.
it
Really.
is. And we're going to get to aerosol masking and that aspect in a future episode and go deep into that. But let's go to our last slide for today, because I've just put in what I think is just a more simplified view here. What we're looking at here is the graph of hydrocarbon man. I mean, I'm toying with these terms. Homo carbonicus, I don't know if that's the right way to make the Latin species name, or Homo detritovorus, meaning this is the age of humans who have grown their civilization on the detritus. That is what that means. I'm not the inventor of this phrase. We are detritovores. This is a couple of people, Catton from his book Overshoot, says we are in essence detritovores. We're going on the waste products of ancient animals, dead animals. But there was someone else a guy named Cobb, made the same point, I think. So it has been made a point that we are Homo detritovorus, Homo carbonicus, hydrocarbon man. And I want to make the point that the access to power, rotary power, transport power, digging power, agricultural power, prior to the age of coal, oil, and natural gas, was human muscle, slaves, and animals.
So
We
in other
then,
words, human muscle, and slaves.
yes, I mean the slaves are obviously humans, but the
Right.
people who enslaved them wouldn't have looked at them that way. I could
Exactly.
have put human muscle, human slaves, but we all know what a slave is, so I didn't put the word human in there. We then have the age of human mastery of hydrocarbons, which is the industrial age, coal, oil, and natural gas. And I've put a little hatch mark up here. It says we are just about here. And we don't have to debate here whether we're on the left side of this peak still heading up, whether this peak is infinite, as some people might want to think it is, or whether we're already on the downslope of this peak. But we're somewhere near the top, according to even the Energy Information Agency, even the International Energy Agency acknowledges now that we're past the easy oil. We're going after what's called tight oil and tight gas. It's called tight because it's difficult and expensive to get, and it doesn't last as long. It doesn't just shoot out of the earth, whether it's oil or gas that we're talking about. And there's two, you can have basically two themes about the future. Either we're going to have to do without the level of energy per capita that we have had, or do with much, 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 much less. Or we're going to use technologies to somehow have a post-carbon, zero-emission industrial civilization. Maybe it's a post-industrial civilization. But the question is, are we simply going to have to do without and go back to something much more of a world made by hand, perhaps using a tiny bit of kerosene to read or candles to read at night, but mostly just going lights out at night and doing most things by hand? Or will we have magical energy forms that are not hydrocarbon? We don't know. And I'm not going to decide here. I'm just saying that this graph is very indicative of the carbon pulse of hydrocarbons that we have mastered and used, all within what will be probably a 300 or 400 year period. And we don't know if we're in the final 40 years, 20 years, 100 years of this.
Right.
Thoughts?
We don't know where we are on the downhill side of this curve.
But we're pretty sure there is a downhill side coming.
Yes, and for many people, it's already underway.
And for some, I mean, for people who quite rightly know how much damage our use of coal, oil, and natural gas has done, how much greenhouse gases the use of them and the mining of them has liberated and generated, much quicker than has ever been liberated by any other Earth time event, short of a colliding with another planet. Volcanism in our primitive history, asteroid collisions, massive pulses of either anaerobic or aerobic bacteria that we think took over the oceans at various times and completely changed and devastated species. Those are prior pulses of carbon or of other gases, hydrogen sulfide or whatever, that have been emitted. Prior pulses in our primitive history have produced extinctions. But there are people who quite rightly want to get rid of coal, oil, and natural gas. Why wouldn't you, if you look at how damaging they've been? And they want the post-carbon, zero-emission, net zero future as soon as we can have it. So those people, I think, should embrace the peak oil idea that we're running out of it anyway. So we should hasten it. And this would be the right thing to do. And many people are working on getting us there or taking us there. And many people have ideas about all the things we should do as consumers that would help us get there. And those are things we can look at in detail in future episodes. Some of them are right, some of them are wrong, some of them sound good, but are really just Dr. Feel Good. They're not really going to do anything, certainly in our lifetimes. But are they worth doing? And what do they involve? These are some of the things we can explore here on the Deep Time with Guy McPherson.
Yes, and because I thought we were here or near here, I made the greatest mistake of my life so far and lived off grid for about a decade. I have subsequently learned about the aerosol masking effect and about the effect of nuclear power plants melting down and stripping away stratospheric ozone. So I think this time, based on what we know now, is going to be relatively short. The post-carbon zero-emission civilization, if it comes into being at all, is going to be of short existence. In any event, the point here is that we are trying to inform people what I wish I had known 15, 20 years ago.
Indeed. And I think we will be able to discuss, as you know, I have some personal experiences and reflections, as you do, on the kinds of actions in future episodes, you know, we will talk. I mean, you've fastidiously, I think, Guy, and laudably stayed away from the shoulds. What should you do? Your main shoulds, if I'm correct, have been only love remains, focus on making the most of each day, and spend time with the people you love. You phrase it so much more eloquently.
I heard many years ago that there is no should, there is only love.
And that's wise. That's a very Buddhist approach to the world.
Right,
I've
exactly.
had numerous Buddhists call me on using the word should. So I've tried to eliminate it. But our society has not eliminated the word should. And we as consumers, as citizens, as people, as humans are subjected to all sorts of shoulds and musts and have tos. And we will have opportunity to examine those in light of the perils and problems around our use of fossil fuels and around industrial civilization. So I think that's as much as I have for today.